Hello everybody, today is part 2 video of the BMW battery modules. We're going to be talking about BMS selection for these things. Here we go. Welcome to my channel. I'm David and I like to do DIY projects that are renewable energy and energy efficiency related. In this video, this is part 2 talking about these BMW modules. These came out of an electric vehicle, and I like to convert electric vehicle batteries into something like this that can be used for whole house backup or off-grid use or power walls, whatever you want to call it. But these are some fantastic BMW battery cells. Now, in my last video on these batteries, I showed how to take these out of the big steel case. And now we're left with them on the bench here, and we've got all these cells. So how do we hook up a BMS to these? Now this is one example of a BMS. This is a Daly brand BMS. It's common port, meaning that both charging and discharging occur through the same wires. It has a balance feature, which in this case means that there's a very tiny little resistor on every cell, and it can bleed off surplus power. Now these are very small resistors, like 30 or 40 milliamps. So there's not a lot of power here, but you can still use it in an application like this because these cells are so well balanced that they're going to require very little in the way of balancing. However, I wouldn't trust something like this for these really big BYD cells. These things need a lot more balancing behind them because they go out of whack earlier compared to something like this. So the one that I'm holding is a 100 amp Daly brand BMS common port with balancing. What you can do is hook up one of these per side. Now I have 6 modules here that all came out of the one big steel case. Now if I group 3 of these modules together, I create one 48 volt battery, and the other 3 modules grouped together create a second 48 volt battery. The 2 batteries can be inside the one big steel case, but they need to be treated separately from a BMS perspective. The nice thing about this particular brand, or one of the many nice features that I like that Daly does, is that they give you very long leads. If we stretch it out, we can reach both sides. So all the way from one end to the other end, we don't even need extensions on this. This reaches all the way from one side to the other. We could take these red leads, we could solder them to every cell, and this BMS can be located right in the middle of this string, and the leads can go from one end all the way to the other end and hook up, and it will work. It will run the length of it. Then out the one end, which is the negative side, I forget if this is which is which, I think this is the negative. You can then come out of the negative side. It'll come with these wires. So let's say it's on here. You could then run this orange wire from the post. You would cut it off and splice it onto, in this case, it'd be the blue wire, which is labeled B as in Bravo minus. So that's your battery wire. So these two need to combine. Now you could combine them using a bunch of different things. You could, if you had a large enough soldering iron, solder them. You could put a ring terminal on this end, and there's already a ring terminal here, and you could bolt them together. You could put them under one big lug and hydraulically crimp them together using a crimp sleeve. Then out of the black side, in this case, which is labeled P as in Papa minus, this goes to the output of the whole battery pack. So that means, in this case, I would probably use this Anderson plug, and this already has one, this particular one that I have, already has a ring terminal. So I would bolt these together, and then I could run out of the case with this. Now remember, this is the safety feature for voltage protection. Over voltage, under voltage is the primary use for these. Now I don't actually want to use this BMS for over current protection. I prefer to use a circuit breaker for over current protection. In this case, I like using the Midnight Solar brand. There's a limiting factor of how many amps a cell can take, but there's also the limiting factor of thermal. So this cell is going to get hot the more amps it's either being charged with or the more amps it's discharging. If you want to play it ultra safe and ultra conservative, you go with the weakest link. So in this case, these are 90 amp hour cells. I like to pick a BMS that's close to that. So in this case, 90 amp hour, I'm picking a 100 amp BMS. Then for circuit protection, I want to go half of that. These are 90 amp hour cells, half of that would be a 45 amp breaker. So the closest I can buy is a 50 amp breaker. So I could get a 50 amp midnight solar breaker with a 100 amp BMS. Chances are none of this is going to fail then because you're derating. Specifically, I've tested this battery pack, which is the same chemistry, or nearly the same chemistry between the two. And I've tested this at different amp rating, and what I found is that it'll get slightly warm, but not to the point where I need to worry about dissipating excess heat at half of its rating. So this happens to be a 120 amp hour pack, and when I charged this at a full 60 amps, it was slightly warm to the touch, but I could hold my hand here without it getting hot. That's going to be the same case with these. So if I was to charge this at 45 amps, being half of its rating, then it might get slightly warm, but not going to get hot. Now, if you want to charge or discharge these at higher rates than that, then start incorporating active cooling. That could be with liquid cooling. These come with liquid heat exchangers, or it could be with convection, being a fan and moving air across them. A 50 amp breaker on this with a 100 amp BMS, I don't suspect that I'm ever going to cause a failure with that type of setup. At least I haven't yet with doing it this way, and I've done it now on several projects. So this wiring harness is long enough to reach all the way to each end. Now if you decide to take each wire and solder it, try not to solder it right to the cell like this, because the heat will dissipate so quickly your soldering iron won't make a good joint. But instead, try soldering it right here. If you try soldering it right here on this little piece of U-shaped metal, then the soldering iron has a much better likelihood of heating that up quickly, making a good solder connection. Now you can always use this plug too. You just have to use the matching wiring harness. And so this can snap in, just like that. Makes for a nice connection. But while this is snapped in, don't cut this, because you'll wind up shorting all of this out and it'll burn out all these traces. So instead, while this is disconnected, you can cut this wire, take off the tape, then you'll have to pull these apart, maybe tape them to a piece of cardboard. Then you can plug this in, and while these wires are taped to the piece of cardboard and spread out, you can check the voltages of each wire and figure out which one goes to which cell, and then solder those wires to these red ones. Now I have one more idea that I'd like to share with you, but I have not experimented with this yet, so I can't say for certain if it works or not. So inside this battery pack was this. It's a large relay module. So you could take a little BMS, one for each string, so there'd still be two BMSs under the hood of this package. Now we're talking about a little tiny low amp BMS. If the two BMSs were hooked up to maybe a relay or a series connection or an Arduino, I've been chatting with a friend of mine about this idea, and he said something called an IC. But essentially we need something that says both circuits, both BMSs need to be on, so and if that happens, then we can keep a circuit closed which powers the relays. Well, I hope that clears up some of the options. I think doing this with a 100 amp BMS and a 50 amp circuit breaker per string is the simplest idea, But if you want to go for something that might be more fun, you could try running these two. So if you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, comment, share. If you're going to buy some of these batteries, you can get them at batteryhookup.com. 10% off if you use my coupon code DavidPaz. Thank you everybody very much for watching.